Let's discuss. Hey everyone, it's Rachel, continuing with my 2021 end of the year videos. I made a video for my top 6 through 10 album of the year for this year, albums of the year. It is blocked right now because one of the bands used Sony and yeah, copyright stuff. So I have disputed that. It will probably end up going up on the channel. I'll figure something out if it, like, my claim doesn't get addressed, but for right now I'm just gonna briefly go over those. I've posted them on my Instagram as well, but I will do the full video, get it up somehow at some point. But we're just gonna start with a brief overview of my 6 through 10 since the video isn't up at the time that I'm posting this, and then I will go in depth over my 1 through 5 and I'll do timestamps on this video. Thank you, and let's get into it with that overview. So as I mentioned, I just want to go over my 6 through 10 picks since that video is currently blocked. So just before getting into my 1 through 5 on the channel, I will go over those. And again, that's brief. I will get that video fully posted on the channel somehow where I'll go further into each of these albums. But just so y'all know my picks and they're at least out there, I'm going to go over them really quickly. So for number 10, I picked DEADLIGHTS with their album The Uncanny Valley. I had not heard of this band before 2021. I asked on Twitter as I finished up my album of the year picks and what I felt I needed to rank that would be in my top, and I said, hey, what are some 2021 releases that y'all feel people have slept on? And right away I got like 3 or 4 replies for this album. So it was the first one I checked out in response to that, and I loved it. Immediately it has sort of like in the intro, the title track, it has that sort of like beepy intro, and it touches on kind of the electronic key sort of sound that's all over this album. There are really 2 strong feels that I think, and one would be like the focus of what I'm talking about there, the electronic sound, the lighter clean vocals, which for me, I love the style of clean vocal, and I think that will be big for whether like people enjoy the album or not, because those 2 sounds are really the main focuses. And then there's like the unclean, hard-hitting sort of, think end of the title track breakdown. The uncleans have a very like you know, a really aggressive flow to them, as most uncleans do, but there's just something in the way that emphasis comes from the instrumentals and stuff. So those are really like the sounds that they alternate between on this, and I love them, so it worked for me just at the end of the top 10 there. Number 9 is Julien Baker with the album Little Oblivions, which for some people may be surprising, but if you know me, Julien Baker is one of my favorite artists. This is her first album with full instrumentation, so she plays all of the instruments on it, and obviously sings and all of that, which is really cool. But then performing these songs after the album came out, she plays with a full band now, which is really awesome. I've seen her play with, you know, Camille, who is plays the violin, who went on tour with her, and she'll have like a drummer or something sometimes, but this is different. Definitely watching the live performances and stuff that she's done, and the songs just sound so much more full and stuff, yet she's still able to have a few tracks where I think her voice really leads the way, and it kind of taps more into that singer-songwriter indie like, you know, focus that she has in her discography. So it just feels like she is an amazing musician, and I feel like this album is her at her best, and I love all of her music, so I feel like that says a lot. That is my number 9 pick. For number 8 for me, Blanket would be my pick. They have an album put out this year, Modern Escapism, and I had not heard of them prior to this year, but going into it, they had a feature from Kadeem France, who was in Loathe, so it was tagged like that on Spotify, so on my release radar when that song came out, it popped up on my playlist, so I checked it out, and they had this really beautiful underlying like shoegazy type of sound to them, and then Kadeem's vocals were unclean and just totally different than the sound I had been expecting going into this feature for some reason. I've heard other Kadeem features and such like that, but listening to this, something really spoke to me about it. I'm not sure what it was, but then so when the full album came out, I gave that a listen, and I just loved it. There are parts where there's almost like a black metal type of sound in the vocals, and then there's like that overall like really type of shoegaze light feel, some beautiful vocals on it, the instrumentation really opens up to be light, and then can really just go somewhere completely different with those heavier parts I'm talking about. So this album, a totally different feel than really anything else I've listened to this year. I love it. That will be my number 8. For number 7, I picked the band JOHARI with their album Yūrei. This is another band that I had not heard of going into 2021, but I was checking the Contortionist Spotify page of their For Fans Of section to see if any had put out 2021 releases, and this was one. I put on the album. The Answer is the opening track, and it's got no unclean vocals. It just kind of really focuses into the gorgeous clean vocals that they have. And then the next track is called Fast and Heavy, and it's exactly how the track goes. It's fast, it's heavy, it's got the unclean side that they have nailed down, and those are their two sounds that they really have a nice balance between all over the rest of the record. So I love the way those first two tracks kind of set the field for that, but then going into the album, they do both of those sounds so well. So if you like progressive metal, this would definitely be my pick for progressive metal this year. I loved it. So then my number 6 pick would be Dead Vectors with the album The Depths of Self. This is an incredibly hardworking band. They've put out an EP every month of this year, as well as putting out this album that I'm talking about. And as I'm recording this on the 31st of December, New Year's Eve, they've put out another album. So they put out 2 albums this year and then like 12 EPs or something ridiculous like that. A ton of music, so they were on my radar. I was aware they were doing all these EPs and that I was definitely missing a bunch of them, but people would request some songs on stream, stuff like that. But then I got 2 songs from people that they wanted reactions for off of The Depths of Self, this album, and I immediately was like, what is this? So heavy, but so ambient at the same time. The electronics and that ambience that I'm talking about, the stuttering effects, stuff like that. Huge sound on this record, a huge part of why it is in my top 10 and really almost in the top 5. And this is probably the record I've listened to most close to the end of the year. So, and I have been hooked on it since then. It worked its way really far up my list really quickly because hearing it, I knew right away I needed to add it to the list somewhere, but I needed more time with it. And then as I kept beating the album, I moved further and further up. So that is my number 6. Again, I'll go in more in depth on the actual video for these picks. I just wanted to get like a 5 or 6 minute overview of what that looked like. So now I'm going to get into my number 5 pick. My number 5 album of 2021 is SPIRITBOX with Eternal Blue. Discussing my album of the year list with a few people, they were like, oh, you did not like it or something, like the fact that it was number 5, but I think that this album is amazing. It did not disappoint me. I had a lot of hype surrounding this. I would say SPIRITBOX, ERRA, those were my most hype, anything in anime, that always will be, but I was just so hyped around this release, doing the live stream and everything, and I really don't believe they disappointed. And I also think that SPIRITBOX faced possibly an unfair amount of criticism because of how much hype they built with their singles before people even knew this was an album. With Holy Roller and such last year, the hype was building, and so it for an album with so much hype around it, I really think that it delivered, and that people were really quick to point out things they didn't like about it that maybe they wouldn't have focused on so much if it had not had so much hype associated with it, if that makes sense. But for me, I love this release from SPIRITBOX, the debut full length. It is amazing. I would say there was like, 1 or 2 things that could have been different to make it a little bit further up in my list, but to be number 5, that's in such a huge music year. It's an excellent album, and it will be on repeat for me for a very long time. The merch that has gone along with it has been incredible as well. There were moments in this album that really just surprised me, even though there was a wide range in the singles that were put out already before the album. There were still moments here that surprised me. The title track is 100% my favorite song off here, probably one of my favorites from this year. That solo in the breakdown is still one of my favorite musical moments at all this year. There were a few on the ERRA record, and that would be another like top musical moment for me. Hearing that, I was so like, you instantly just fall in love with something when you hear it. That's what happened there for me with this track. Just the overall feel to it as well. It's an excellent title track. I think it really encompasses everything that there is to love about this album. You've got that kind of like slower groove, some really soulful vocals. It goes the heavy route. You have that solo in the breakdown that I mentioned. It's just everything that I could want from a song. The title track on this album is. I think that maybe if instead, because Holy Roller, I love Holy Roller. I loved it when it dropped. I revisit it not as frequently as the majority of this album. And I don't necessarily think that for me it's how long Holy Roller was out, but more so how it feels when listening to the album in full. Holy Roller just kind of doesn't fit that same feel that the rest of the album has. So just listening through, and it's not because of how heavy it is either, because I think like in Silk and the strings and stuff, you're getting that sound that fits better with the rest of the album. But Holy Roller, for some reason, it just doesn't feel at the same feel. I guess it doesn't feel the same way. Listening to it just sort of feels weird. In the mix of the album, the mix of the album, speaking of in a totally different sense, the actual mix, Dan Bronstein is amazing, did Volumes, and I think that's where it really stood out to me with those two albums. And then he's worked on a ton of other stuff as well that just really proves how amazing. And I think that was really important with this album, because something like this in the riffs, you know, the Mike Stringer bendy riffs, Courtney's super powerful vocal performance, and then, you know, ending with something like Constance, which is not necessarily as powerful like that, but just brings that emotional feel to it that, you know, there's a good blend of through the rest of the album. I think potentially if instead of like Holy Roller there was something else there that I loved as much as like Halcyon, Eternal Blue, the title track, you know, The Summit is another really good example, but those are all non-singles and they stuck out to me immediately on my first listen. I loved them. So not a big deal for me having the older songs that were included on the record because of their age. I think that some of my favorites, including my actual favorite off of the record, were still unreleased when the album came out. So for me, it wasn't so much of an issue there. I think maybe if I had, instead of Holy Roller, something else like that fit that kind of bill, and then maybe, you know, I didn't end up loving Circle With Me as much. I love the song still, but as much as the majority of the rest of the record and the singles and whatnot. So I think Holy Roller, like in there, if those two were maybe something different, then this could be higher. But really, number 5 is like, this is fantastic. Excellent record. SPIRITBOX's debut did not disappoint me at all. The merch has definitely not disappointed me either. There's been a ton of awesome stuff. They constantly are putting out good merch. So make sure you take a look. If you haven't, I will include everything you need in the description. That is my number 5. My number 4 album of 2021 is Sleep Token. This Place Will Become Your Tomb. This is a phenomenal record. I feel like with the amount of talent and the style of music that Sleep Token does, it would be really hard for them to put something out that would not end up in my top 5. Though I did expect, with it being a Sleep Token record, I did kind of expect it to be like my number 1 or 2, and I had it in the number 2 spot for a while, and I think that moving it isn't so much a reflection of the album itself and more of some stuff I realized that I just loved a lot. I don't want to say more either, because that's difficult, but I'll get into what it is about this. But this record, the production on it, first of all, amazing. If you go and you listen to Atlantic and some of the effects that are used there, both vocally and just in general, put on a good pair of headphones and just listen to that song. It is amazing levels of production, and that is, it's another, I mean, it's always important, but when you have bands like this where, you know, you've got talent like Vessel's voice and the drumming that's in Sleep Token, and such room for instrumentals to go one direction or the other, you know what I mean? You have to be able to do production like this, because there would just be so much that were to be missed. And I think for me, production on this was huge. It's some of my favorite production from this year. Think The Love You Want as well, because it's got because for me, I think Hypnotize is sort of, you know, that sound that some people were looking for more of from Sleep Token on this record. You know, it's got the kind of aggression that people look for from them, but then you also have, like, with Atlantic, what I was talking about, just the piano and Vessel's voice and these effects, and then you go in and you've got songs that are a little bit of a different sort of feel to them, like Mine, and then Fall For Me being like the interlude type of thing that they released as a single. That it's just got so many different sounds to it. So the quality has to carry over in the production there, and it was out of the park. Amazing. Vessel's vocal performance, out of this world. Missing Limbs as a closer track, I love that because I was expecting sort of like a blood sport type of feel, and it was not that. It still got emotional. I don't like the outro at all. I don't like how it outros like that. I still don't quite understand like the choice there. So I would definitely change that, but that's not that big of a deal because the song itself I love. It's such beautiful melodies, and it's just an incredible track altogether. I think if maybe like in the section of like Fall For Me, Mine, there was another track. I can't remember. There was one other track too. In that section though of songs, I think it loses a little bit of traction. Like I don't revisit Fall For Me very much. I don't revisit Mine too much. But the rest of the album, especially towards the ending, like the last 4 or 5 songs, so good. The opener, amazing. So I think if it carried through like right in that like just after the intro, if that section were a bit stronger, it may have ended up 1 or 2 for me. But the songs off of this album that I love, I absolutely love them. It's an amazing piece of music. Just yes to Sleep Token altogether. So that is my number 4 for this year. Sleep Token, This Place Will Become Your Tomb. My number 3 album of 2021 is Silent Planet with their album Iridescent. There is something so special about the sound that Silent Planet has on this record. They've always been a special band, I feel. They put on a ridiculous live show. So amazing. Garrett is a really awesome person, just like watching him interact with everyone and sort of interacting with him a few times myself. Just a very caring and kind person. So it's cool to then see them kind of progress as a band musically as well, because when Trilogy came out in 2020, it was announced, I believe, as a standalone single, a closing of the chapters, the first 3 albums, but then it makes a lot of sense to me hearing this album in full and the direction that they went and some of the themes lyrically, which are totally different for Silent Planet. I felt like this is a much more lyrically accessible album overall. So I love the topics that they write about. I love the way that Garrett writes in general. It's just like some of the best writing lyrically that I've seen. It would be Law Dispute and Silent Planet for me. So to see him then go and they make an album like this, and in addition to even the lyricism, tracks like Terminal and such, seeing the different vocals, like having multiple different places, you've got Mitch, Garrett, you've got Thomas, all doing vocals. Obviously not Alex, but he was just going to work on these drums. And some of those really open, clean vocal parts are some of the, like the New Eternity. That is one of my favorite Silent Planet songs, and it's got to do with just that hook. There are a few hooks up there that just really grab me, and I think that this album really taps into that sort of stuff and stuff that's beyond that for Silent Planet. They've definitely expanded their sound a bit beyond that now, but it still is Silent Planet. I've talked a lot about bands sounding different sometimes, and then like it feels like they miss a little bit of like what they were passionate about or what was most prominent about them before, and it does not feel that way at all with Silent Planet. The chorus and Second Sun, which should be the song playing right now, my favorite chorus of this year probably, and it was a hard decision to make, but it is just so catchy. It's got like, I don't know, those hooks there, like feel it all, why do I haunt my body? There's just something so catchy in that, and immediately after we listened to the record too, it was one of those things on Discord where we all kept on just like repeating those lyrics because it's stuck in everyone's head and we all really loved it. But then it goes beyond that. It's got those heavy parts. They dropped the F word, which is not something that they've done, so they're doing different things. They showed up with like that tone too, because something else about Silent Planet that sticks out a lot is the tone of that really clean tone of the guitar. New Eternity would be another great example of that. I love that, and I think that's something that you don't hear quite as much in this. They took like a more like a bouncier, kind of thicker approach overall in a lot of these songs, like obviously Panopticon, in using the bass was a really cool choice, stuff like that. So just a lot of detail in this, a lot of passion in this record, which you would expect from Silent Planet, but also just so good. The title track, I don't know, I was expecting when I got to that point in the record for it to kind of like tap into some Terminal type of vibes, and it just really surprised me having, so stuff like that I really like to see, especially when it works so well. yeah, I don't know. I translate the night the way that, you know, if when you think of the lyrics, translate the night in that song and the way it just hits after that. They've really mastered this sound. So for me, without a doubt, Silent Planet, my number 3, Iridescent. I will include all their, you know, merch, social media and stuff in the description of this video. Show them some love if you can, or if you've enjoyed this album. I'm going to move on to my number 2. My number 2 album of 2021 is, without a doubt, Sentinels with their album Collapse by Design, and I am absolutely eating my words right now. When the singles were coming out for this album, something I had mentioned was, you know, I love these, I love the sound of this, but with a full-length album coming, I really think I would need to see some variety in the vocals. And I was like, I just can't see like a full-length album with all, you know, the vocals not really, you know, having much variety. I don't know how that would work. But in the album, I would say you really don't get that much variety in the vocals from the point that I said that, but it works so well. I expected to love this album for sure, because the moment I ever heard Inertia, and that was the first Sentinel song I ever heard, somebody requested it on stream and I fell in love with them. There's just a huge part of it for me is that vocal flow. Not only I love the vocals in general, obviously, because as I mentioned, it's like a, you know, if you don't like that sort of vocal, it's really what you get on this album. Obviously, Dave does some additional vocals, but I would say the range there, it just isn't that much different, but it wasn't necessary at all. So Inertia, not only like just the sound of the vocals, but the flow, like when you think of like I Disconnect, and then like the riff after that. And this would, after having gone back in Sentinel's discography now at this point, this is almost like a more tame riff album for them. And I even said that in the Discord event yesterday, and someone was like, what? Like, if this is tame, because it's still not tame in the riffs at all. The wacky Sentinels riffs, I love that. That is a huge sound for them, and I think that with this, they have that, but they've also tapped into so much of that ambience, and for me, that is huge. That is probably like ambient sort of metalcore, and then Animate being my favorite band. That is one of my favorite sounds. So when you have those huge breakdowns, but then also there's just like that lovely ambience throughout the track, I cannot get enough of that sound. And with Sentinels doing both, like, and those, so the drops and the ambience, I think it's a mixture of those two things for me. The drums are always absolutely going, like on those parts I'm talking about, like think again that I Disconnect in Inertia, not only the riff, but like the drums, the emphasis there, all of that, and like their drops. I talk a lot on the channel about like the fuck drops. Off the bat with Sentinels, you get one right away in the opening track, and then it goes into Inertia. It's got all this energy, but it also has this more emotional feel to it. You listen to the lyrics, and it's I don't know, I just love it. It sticks out to me a lot. And looking at this, like the visualizer, you see how like the stuff is like moving on it and flying around. It just kind of like reminds me of like the ambience that's in that album. So it'll have like, you know, I was talking about the vocal flow, something like that verse that I'm talking about in Inertia. There's so many different songs on this album that have a really awesome display of just interesting switches in the vocal patterns, like in the middle of a verse or something. And I just love it. I cannot get enough of it. I've noticed re-listening to it, because I have not stopped jamming this album since I did the stream for it. I just fell more and more in love with it from there. And what I noticed myself focusing on, because you can kind of tell like what you're head banging most intensely to, and it's just some of those vocal patterns, and they've got that same emphasis that I'm talking about from the instrumentals as well, that build up, and then it will take you into a big drop, and then you've got that ambience, and it will like open up. And then also they have my favorite instrumental track of the year, Solitude, on this album. My favorite like stretch of songs is Desecration, Isolation, into Solitude. I don't know what it is about that, but like just the like, it's got such a nice, beautiful tone to it that's almost upbeat at some parts, but really sad at the same time, if that makes sense. And I love that. There is just a ton to hear in this album too, and those details. So for me, I had Sleep Token at my number 2 for a long time, and I wasn't moving it, and just looking at my list, I was like, something does not feel right about this. And it was like, it was down at like number 4, I think, or something like that. And I tested it out, like switching it with Sleep Token, and I was like, this is probably more accurately representing like how things went. Because I love that Sleep Token record, don't get me wrong, but this has stuck with me and been on repeat much more, much more, and I don't see it coming off at all. There's not a bad track on it. As I mentioned, my favorite instrumental track, so I don't skip that either. No bad tracks on it. Sentinels, Collapse by Design, that is my number 2 for this year. Now I'm going to get into my number 1. My number 1 album of 2021, ERRA, with their self-titled record. It just would not make sense for me to have anything else. Re-listening to this album, there just is nothing that hit me the way that this release did, and it was one of the earliest releases on my lists in general, and I've had a ton of time with it. It's my most played album from this year as well. It's my most played album this year overall. Released this year in general, and I just haven't got sick of it in the slightest. And especially having so much hype, because this was definitely my most hyped album of this year too. Going into that live stream to listen to this album, I was so excited, and then there were just a ton of moments that lived up to that expectation and exceeded them. The Electric Twilight riff, you know, a number of things. I remember Gungrave, the breakdown in Gungrave right away, pretty much, in terms of newer stuff as I was listening to the album. And I just knew right away, like, all right, this is going to blow. Because as singles, they put out such strong singles. I was like, I don't know if I could love anything on this album the way that I love the Shadow Autonomous Chorus. And I was wrong. Vanish Canvas, one of my favorite songs of this year. Gungrave, like that breakdown I'm talking about, that last one with the seeing it live too. So I got to go and see ERRA live on the August Burns Red Leveler tour, and it was incredible. I've seen ERRA live a number of times, but they are on top of their game. They sounded amazing. JT, Jess, all of them. But JT and Jesse's vocal performance on this album, definitely a direct reflection. They sounded amazing in person as well, so it seems like they've just really figured out how to do everything to the best of their ability at this point. Like the technical riffs on this, usually when I have a band like this that has a lot of like that technical, tappy, really awesome guitar work, that is pretty much what you get on the album. That's what you can expect. But with this, you have like so much more melodic stuff. You've got stuff like Memory Fiction, which is a entirely different feel for the most part, and it's just a range of sound, but still all of it is so ERRA. It's just listening through their discography and how they've, you know, going from, you know, Drift and Neon and all of that, and hearing these albums and then getting this, it just seems like the perfect mixture of their sounds, and that they figured out, like, you know, figured it out. Because you know, when I think back, there are a ton of moments and they all have so much variety in them. Like I've already mentioned them for the most part. The chorus in Shadow Autonomous, the outro in Divisionary, also that was one of my favorite moments to see live, was that Divisionary outro. Oh man, I don't know. So, and I didn't even get to see Shadow Autonomous live. I did get to see Vanish Canvas, and hearing them perform these songs live, it just further confirmed for me that this was my album of the year, I think. And then every time I even, you know, was like, okay, this is my album. It just, there's no question for me. To go and have so many releases this year and then have this be the most prominent. And yesterday we did the Discord. I feel like this is probably the best way for me to sum this up rather quickly instead of talking about ERRA for another 45 minutes, which I easily could do. So we had the Discord events. I put out polls asking for people's favorite, you know, riff of the year, breakdown of the year, chorus of the year, song of the year. Every single category had a ton of ERRA in it. So so it's not just like, you know, for me, I was like, see, because for my submissions, I was having a hard time. Like, I've got to put something other than ERRA because I've got to mix up the options here. But they did everything so well that those categories, they just blew them out of the water. They blew the album of the year away as well, which I think it's so deserving. And for me, just nothing else would make sense. The mixture of those cleans with JT and Jesse, the hype, I guess, especially, like, I remember hearing Shadow Autonomous for the first time and just really being moved by the song. I really needed it at the time that it was released. And then going into the album and the non-singles being just as quality as the singles had been, it blew my mind. And so I just, yeah, ERRA, 100% my album of the year. I will be seeing them live as many times as I can in my life because it's just so much fun, and they're so awesome as well. So I will include all their merch. They have some really awesome merch. Like you can see, I'm wearing this reflecty ERRA jacket right now. I'll include their merch, their socials, and all of that in the description of this video. You know, if this finds their way to ERRA, thank you so much for being so amazing to me. And a lot of the highlights of this year were ERRA related. I got to meet Jesse and JT earlier this year at that show, and they gave me a shout out during the show, and I nearly had a heart attack. And so yeah, that was a ton of fun. Yeah, that is my album of the year list. Number 1. I'll post a full list later as well. But thank you very much. As I mentioned, that concludes my album of the year list for 2021. I thank you very much for watching. Again, I will post the merch and all of the good stuff in the description of these videos for these bands. My 6 through 10 video will hopefully find its way onto the channel very shortly. I'll have to figure something out with that, but right now I just need to get the rest of the videos posted, or at least recorded, and all of that. So huge shout out to any band on any of these lists. Again, I would not be able to be making videos, and I wouldn't be able to really be sharing my passion with so many people if you were not doing what you were doing. I just love the music so much, and being able to come on and do these sort of things when before I was just like figuring out my album of the year list, putting all this time into it for really nothing, like just to keep it and be like, okay, yeah, I agree with that, that's my list. And now I'm able to do stuff like this, so it really means the world to me for anyone that takes the time to listen to any of this at all. The bands are just like such a huge part of my life, and you know, these are the soundtracks to every day as I'm working from home listening to music. So it's just very important to me, and I just wanted to take a second to say thank you to anyone who watches my videos or any of this stuff. It really means the world to me, so thank you very much. I hope everyone has a happy... I will see y'all in 2022.